Thank you. Our next speaker will, I don't know if Rex wanted to say a few words about you, Aimee, or you're ready to ready to hit your presentation.
Yeah, I'm ready.
Okay. Well, thanks for joining us, Aimee. Why don't you go ahead?
All right. Looks like my screen sharing is working. That's good. So my name is Aimee Duchene. I am the County Ag Inspector for East Ottertail. I've been the County Ag Inspector for almost 10 years now. In 2019, I was the president of the Minnesota Association of County Ag Inspectors. And today, I'm just going to go over a brief overview of weed inspections and the Minnesota Noxious Weed Law. There's a lot of information out there about the noxious weed law. It can kind of feel like a rabbit hole sometimes. So when I was making this presentation, I was trying to figure out, what do townships really need to know when we're talking about the noxious weed law? There's all sorts of things that go into this. The Noxious Weed Advisory Committee, the Association of County Ag Inspectors, we have the Commissioner of Agriculture, we have seed units, biocontrol units, all of these different organizations and entities that kind of all have an input into what the noxious weed law actually is. So you can see where it could easily kind of become like this rabbit hole. So today we are going to focus on kind of what townships need to know or what I want to get across. So we are going to focus on the control list. These are the weeds that we deal with every year. Usually your spotted knapweeds, leafy spurge, thistles, that sort of thing. We're going to focus on the enforcement procedure. And I saw in your itinerary, you might be going over that again with another speaker, so I won't get into it too much. And then just kind of what the noxious weed law actually is, how it came about, and a lot of the common questions we get when dealing with the noxious weed law. So we will get started. I will say that I need to be done by 10:50. My 6-month-old has an ear infection, so I need to get her to the doctor this afternoon. So we will get going. So with the Minnesota Noxious Weed Law, this was actually formed in the late 1800s. It was originally called the Canada Thistle Law. That's a neat Minnesota history for you there. The Canada thistle was the first species that was added to the list in 1872. So we have been fighting Canada thistle for over 150 years, which is quite the battle. When referencing the Minnesota statutes, it's usually 18.76 through 18.91. The purpose of the law is that residents of the state be protected from the injurious effects of noxious weeds on public health, the environment, public roads, crops, livestock, and other property. One of the things that I like about our noxious weed program in Minnesota is that we commonly reference the law when we come into question about how we enforce something, or what if this situation comes up, or what about this plant? We always look at what the law says. So what does the law say? It says that a person owning land, a person occupying land, or a person responsible for the maintenance of public land shall control or eradicate all noxious weeds on the land at a time and in a matter ordered by an inspector or county designated employee. So in short, that means that landowners are expected to control, whether it be mechanical, chemical, or biological, any species on the control list we're going to focus on today. If they are controlling, they are then in compliance. So they are controlling that infestation from getting larger. So what's the big deal? We commonly get this question, like why are these plants so bad? How do they end up on this list? Well, noxious weeds are they're a problem because they are highly adaptable to disturbed areas, are able to spread at alarming rates. They can cause economic damage, and they can outcompete native vegetation that is important to our unique landscapes that we have in Minnesota. Noxious weeds can also create problems with soil erosion, diminish forage productions on lands used by domestic and wild animals, and impact the public in many negative ways. So in order to get on this list, they have to demonstrate some sort of harm to the economy, environment, or forage or human health. So what makes these noxious weeds different than your common weed? Well, the main difference between a common weed and a noxious weed is that a noxious weed has enormous capacity for destruction and are very difficult to control. They have an edge over our native plants, being that they have no other, I guess, competition to keep them in check. With our native plants, we kind of have that, what do you call it, that check and balance. It's a very healthy plant competition. But when you start introducing these plants from Europe or Asia, or it's an ornamental that got away, their defense is gone, their competition. So that's one way that they spread. So being that we're going to talk about weeds, we kind of have to go over some basic biology first with plants. So we have annuals. They complete their life cycle in one growing season. They germinate from seed, they grow, they flower, they go to seed, then they die. A good example of an annual is going to be Palmer amaranth. Then we have our biennials. They complete their life cycle in 2 growing seasons. The first year, they are going to be a rosette, which is that cluster of leaves on the ground. And the second year, they are going to bolt up, flower, and go to seed. Perennials can live 3 or more years. The first year or second year, they're typically just the rosette, and then the second or third year, they bolt up and flower. And then usually our plumeless thistle is a good example of a perennial. So with our noxious weed law, we have a couple of different categories that are under that. We have our state prohibited noxious weeds, which include the eradicate list and the control list. We have our state restricted noxious weeds, and we have 4 specially regulated plants. This year, we did have some plants added to the list. Occasionally, we have plants that are removed, but in 2020, that was not the case. Maybe next year. So prohibited noxious weeds are annual, biennial, or perennial plants that the Commissioner of Agriculture has deemed to have potential or known to be detrimental to human or animal health, the environment, public roads, crops, livestock, or other property, kind of like we had discussed about before. There's some sort of harm that they can do. We have our eradicate list. Plants that are on this list are either in very small isolated populations across Minnesota, or they are not in Minnesota yet, but they are deemed a large enough threat where they are put on this list. So if they do show up one day, we have the resources to go after them right away. Then we have our controlled list that I mentioned before. These are weeds that we deal with every summer. It's our thistles, our spotted knapweed, our leafy spurge, common tansy, and species on this list need to be controlled from the infestation getting larger. So this is our eradicate list. I am not going to go through all of these. In fact, I'm just going to hit on one because they are in small populations across Minnesota. Like I said earlier in the slide, we are going to focus on what townships are likely going to be dealing with. So these are just a couple of photos of the plants that are on the eradicate list. We have our knapweeds, Japanese hop, Japanese honeysuckle, Chinese hogweed, black swallowwort, poison hemlock, Palmer amaranth. And one we are going to hit on is Palmer amaranth, just because that seems to get a lot of attention over the years. So Palmer amaranth is an annual of the pigweed family. Usually pigweeds are very hard to identify when they're only a couple inches tall. When they get larger and more mature, it gets a lot easier to identify them. With Palmer amaranth, you can see in the middle right photo there, the leaf with the stem. If you fold that stem over the leaf, like in the upper picture, the stem will be longer than the leaf itself. That is one way to identify Palmer amaranth. Palmer amaranth was introduced to Minnesota, I want to say in 2016, I believe. And it kind of started off in Yellow Medicine County, Lyon County, and there was some in Todd County, and it came over to Minnesota in a conservation practice seed mix from the southern part of the US. And the Minnesota Department of Agriculture, they have been working on these sites to eradicate the infestations. They found that fire has been the most effective tool, especially since it is an annual. If they'll torch the plant and then kind of blast an area around it too to kill off the seed. And they have been monitoring 69 sites of Palmer amaranth in Minnesota for the past 3 years, and they have not found any more Palmer amaranth in those 69 sites. So they are considering those sites eradicated. They will continue to do some follow-up, but it won't be on an every year basis. So that's a pretty good success story. We know it's hard to eradicate anything, especially things we can't eat. So it's been fantastic that they've been able to make that progress on it. And now we have our control list. You can see on the top there, Canada thistle was added to the list in 1872. And then as the years went by, we kind of added a couple more. And then most recently, Bohemian knotweed was added to the list in 2020. We will go through each of these. Let's see, we're going to start off with purple loosestrife. So this is a perennial, 3 to 7 feet tall with stout stems. It kind of forms in this bush shaped. It has purple flowers on it with 5 petals. The petals are always going to be wrinkled. That's a good way to identify it. It likes to grow in wetter areas such as road ditches, lake shores, stream banks, and it does reproduce by seed and root. It does have a native look-alike called fireweed. So there is a side-by-side comparison of fireweed and purple loosestrife. Fireweed is on the left, purple loosestrife is on the right. Fireweed has 4 petals and it is native to Minnesota, so it's a good plant. And it likes more acidic soil. So you're gonna find it where there's more pine trees growing, pine trees, sandier soil, perhaps rocky soil. So it is common to see it kind of in that northeastern part of Minnesota. Meanwhile, purple loosestrife on the right side, you can see again, and it's those 5 petals, and that's one easy way to identify it from fireweed. And we have spotted knapweed. This is a biennial. It can be 3 to 5 feet tall. It is called spotted knapweed because the bracts, which are these little guides underneath the purple flower, each bract has a brown spot on it, giving it a spotted appearance, and spotted knapweed. It does have kind of a silvery green leafy color to it, and the stem is almost woody. It can be pretty rigid. And like I said before, it is a biennial. So if you find a small patch of it, you can actually get a lot of success by just hand pulling it. I'm originally from Little Falls, and up by our family farm, we had some spotted knapweed that was brought in on a road grader when they fixed up the road. And it just so happens every year we have usually a family reunion around the 4th of July. So we'll walk down to that corner of the road and pull out spotted knapweed plants. And the first year, I think we pulled out probably about 30. But last year we walked out there and I think I pulled out 2. So it does work if you just have the time to do it, and it's a manageable size. But typically spotted knapweed blooms July through August. And then we do have one look-alike that gets commonly confused, especially when you're looking like in a pasture from the road. We have wild bergamot, which is a native plant. So it's a good plant. It's very aromatic and it has opposite leaves and the stem is square. Spotted knapweed has a round stem, and you can see the leaves are much different. The flower is much different. Once you get up in person, you can definitely tell the difference, but we have had some confusion with that in the past up in Otter County. Then we have leafy spurge. This is one of our early blooming plants. Usually it will bloom middle of May or end of May through the end of June, just kind of depending on when our spring starts. It is a perennial, so it can live 3 or more years. And the easiest way to identify leafy spurge is if you break the stem, a white milky sap is going to come out, and that's 100% every time. Easiest way to identify leafy spurge is to break apart the stem. Then we have wild parsnip. This is a biennial, 3 to 5 feet tall. I'm pretty sure I've seen it 6 feet tall too. I'm 5'2" myself, and I know I've seen it taller than I. And with wild parsnip, it kind of looks like dill sometimes, or golden Alexander, but you can see the leaves are very different than what you would see with dill. And the stem is very rigid, hollow. And if you break open the stem and get the sap on your skin, it will cause a blister. It's not like poison ivy where some people react to it and others don't. If you get the sap on your skin, you will get a blister like that bottom left photo. And that's a pretty conservative reaction. If you Google it, there's a lot worse images out there, but I didn't want to put that on this presentation. I myself, I've gotten burned by the plant before. It just ended up getting a quarter-size blister on my ankle. It wasn't the end of the world. It was actually a little bit better than poison ivy because it didn't itch. However, if you just brush up against the plant, you're not likely to react. You literally need to break the leaf or the stem and rub it on your skin to get that reaction. I got my blister when I walked through a dish that was mowed for wild parsnip and I didn't know about it. So looking at golden Alexander and wild parsnip, golden Alexander is a good native plant. It is much shorter than wild parsnip. Golden Alexander is only probably 2 feet tall. And with wild parsnip, you can see the leaves attached directly to the stem. In fact, they clasp the stem. Whereas golden Alexander, there is a little stem connecting the leaf to the main stem. So that is a wonderful way to identify the two, or to tell them apart. And as long as we're talking about wild parsnip, a lot of people ask about cow parsnip. And cow parsnip is native to Minnesota, so it's a good plant. It can grow 3 to 10 feet tall, and it gets leaves that are up to 3 feet in diameter. It's commonly found along trails, ditches. It can get quite tall, and on our eradicate list, we do have giant hogweed. Giant hogweed is not in Minnesota, but it is on the list just in case it were to pop in, we'd be able to control it right away. But giant hogweed can be 10 to 20 feet tall, and it has 5 foot wide leaves, and the flower itself is 2 to 3 feet in diameter. So it's literally ginormous, giant. And so it seems like every summer I get a couple phone calls from people saying that they think they have giant hogweed, but 100% of the time I go out there and it's cow parsnip, which is fine. I'd rather have people call and ask me about this plant rather than have them not call at all, and it turns out to be something not so great. So we have common tansy. This is a perennial. It typically blooms July through August. Has the yellow button-like flowers on it. The leaves, they kind of look like ferns. And one of the easiest ways to identify common tansy is if you crush the leaf or the stem. It is very fragrant. It smells like a really bad perfume. It can be kind of confused with goldenrods from a distance because they do bloom at the same time. But once you get up close, you'll be able to tell the difference. Then we have Canada thistle. Like I said, this was added to the noxious weed list in 1872. Canada thistle does not have any spines on its stem. It seems like it blooms June through September, and if you're going to cut it once, it usually does sprout back. So it does take multiple cuttings throughout a year unless you know how to time it right. It does have light pink flowers on it. And when we look at plumas thistle, this guy has spines all over. You can see they're all over the stem, all over the leaf. So if you see a thistle that looks really nasty, it's probably plumas thistle. Canada thistle, no spines on the stem. Plumas thistle has spines on the stem. Then we have common reed grass. I've always called this Phragmites. There is a native Phragmites and a invasive Phragmites, and the invasive Phragmites is on the list. The invasive Phragmites has a large seed head compared to our native Phragmites, which is kind of more scrawny looking. The invasive has dark green leaves, the native has light green leaves, and this is in wet areas, wetlands. It can have a pretty thick, dense patch once it does get established. Then we have our knotweeds. These were more recently added to the list. We have giant knotweed, Japanese knotweed, and Bohemian knotweed. And funny enough, Bohemian knotweed is actually the hybrid of giant knotweed and Japanese knotweed. So their baby is Bohemian knotweed. It has hollow bamboo-like stems. The leaves are incredibly large. Obviously on giant knotweed, they're very large. Bohemian knotweed, not surprisingly, is kind of in between the size of giant knotweed and Japanese knotweed is the smallest. It does have a reddish brown stem in the winter that can easily be seen, and it is a perennial. And as you can see in the picture there, it does have the capacity to grow very rapidly. It does grow just about anywhere, sun, shade, wet, dry. It can grow up through the cracks of the sidewalks as well. And we have common barberry. This is an ornamental that escaped. You can see it has spines on the stems, and it does have a nice berry on it. The leaves turn a dark red in the fall, but when it's planted in the wrong area, it just goes crazy. So if it's in wooded areas, it becomes very thick. It's nearly impossible to walk through. We have narrow leaf bittercress. Personally, I have not run across this plant, but it's an annual, or it can be a biennial too. I want to say the males are annuals and the biennials are females, I think. But it's commonly found in forested floodplains and along rivers and streams, so it likes that wetter area. And it has multiple small four-petaled white flowers that are produced along the stem, and the seed is actually in the form of the seed pod. Now we have our restricted noxious weed list, and the plants on this list may not be sold, transported illegally, or intentionally planted in Minnesota. So like this is more intended for nurseries. So nurseries can't be selling buckthorns, they can't be selling crown vetch, Queen Anne's lace, Siberian pea shrub. That was one that was recently added on there. I know a Siberian pea shrub used to be included in old NRCS windbreak programs way back when, because we still have some at our family farm. However, now that it's on the list, you can't intentionally sell it or plant it here in Minnesota. So with this list, we're just going to hit up our buckthorns. We have our common buckthorn, and the easiest way to identify buckthorn is in the fall, if you're out hunting or just going through a walk. All of the other trees will have dropped their leaves, but buckthorn remains green. Common buckthorn does have spines on the stem, where glossy buckthorn does not. So glossy buckthorn, no spines. Common buckthorn does have spines. With both of our buckthorns, they do produce a berry. That's kind of a reddish, bluish, purple color, and the birds really like the berries. But the berries act as a laxative for the birds, so as the birds fly about, that is one way that it's spread. We have our specially regulated plants that are on this list, maybe native species such as our poison ivy, or have demonstrated economic value, but also have the potential to cause harm in non-controlled environments. So we have Amur maple on there and Norway maple. These are sold as ornamental trees. However, being that they are on this list, they should only be planted in an area that's going to be mowed. So let's say in the middle of your yard is okay to plant an Amur maple because you're going to be mowing around it all the time. However, you don't want to plant an Amur maple by the edge of a wooded area that's not mowed, just because they are very good cedars and they can overtake a forest fairly quickly. And it does take some control efforts to try to kind of knock that back down. Poison ivy, it's a native perennial. Sometimes it can be a climbing vine. Here in Minnesota, I've only kind of seen it having a woody stem, and the stem does have berries that stay on it all winter long. 3 leaves, the leaves usually start to turn red in the fall, usually when the sumac does. And being it is on this list, the law says that it should be controlled in areas where the public might have interaction with it. So like the sides of trails or boat X's, side of the roads, that sort of thing. I don't know how well it's enforced. It seems like a lot of the parks I've been to have spotted or have poison ivy along their trails, but maybe that's their way of keeping you on the trail, I would think. It seems like a pretty effective barrier, but it can cause a rash upon contact. Not everyone is allergic to it, but some people are. If it's burned and you inhale the smoke, that can also irritate your lungs if you are sensitive to poison ivy. Oops. There we go. So weed management basics. This is just a reminder that there's a weed for every season. Like we just talked about, there's weeds blooming from May through the end of September, it seems like. And kind of just a reminder that don't get so focused on your thistles that you may not notice the common tansy or wild parsnip blooming just a couple miles down the road. And everyone has weeds. I'm the county weed inspector for the east part of Ottertail, and we have weeds on our property. We have plumas thistle, Canada thistle, common tansy, and spotted knapweed. With the common tansy, we sprayed it with Escort in one fall, and that took great care of it, nipped it right in the butt. I haven't had to do it since. We go out and we cut our thistles in our pasture with either a mower or a machete, depends how we're feeling that day. And we also have a small area of spotted knapweed in one of our pastures that will go out there and handful because it's not a very big area. So literally everyone has weeds. The key is to work on managing them. And one of the ways that we can manage them is herbicide. This can be a very effective tool. I believe it was in 2019, a lot of the townships got the MnDOT noxious weed manual or book, and in there had herbicide recommendations for a lot of the weeds in that book. And that is an excellent guide, great resource. Then we have mechanical. So this would be mowing, disking, chopping, hand pulling, shovel removal, whatever people are comfortable with. Typically, this is a more cost-effective way of controlling weeds. However, you probably need to do a repeat application. Then we have prescribed fire. This is an excellent tool if you are comfortable with it. Some of these plants have seeds that are viable for 8 to 10 years. So if you can get a really hot fire going through it, you will set back that seed bank. Then we have our biological control for leafy spurge. We have flea beetles. And these flea beetles will only eat leafy spurge. They went through years and years and years of testing before they got a thumbs up from everybody on one of the committees for the Minnesota Department of Agriculture. And these guys are about the size of a fruit fly. And they don't fly, but they are very good jumpers. And they spend most of their life at the bottom or in the root of the plant. That's where the eggs are hatched, and the larvae eat at the root of the plant, and then for about 2 to 3 weeks out of the entire year, they come up to the surface of the plant, usually in late June, and that's where they find their mate and they do it all over again. They like hot, calm days. They don't like wind. They don't like cold. They don't like rain. So your time limit or your time window to go out there and see these guys isn't necessarily very large. But if you're able to, you can go out there and collect them and kind of move them around to different areas if there's a large enough population. With these spurge or with these beetles, they're never going to eat themselves out of house and home. So you're always going to have a little bit of leafy spurge because that's their home, that's their food source. However, it's supposed to be a much more manageable amount of leafy spurge, as you can see in the before and after photo. So you could go from an infestation that has, 90% cover of leafy spurge down to something that has, 10%, and we would be pretty happy with that. Whenever I get flea beetles, I like I usually like to collect them from our kind of county area. because that way I know that they can handle our winters when it gets down to negative 36 degrees. And so far we've had pretty good luck with that. I know if you're interested in getting biocontrol, you can either talk with your county ag inspector or Monica Chandler with the Minnesota Department of Agriculture. The caterpillar up there, that is the leafy spurge hawk moth caterpillar. He can grow 4 to 5 inches long. He can be red, orange, or yellow. And when they get on a plant, they chow down the leafy spurge in minutes. It's really neat to be able to watch them if you find one. The MDA used to release those guys, but caterpillars being caterpillars, they turn into moths and fly away. So we don't release them anymore, but they are still out and about. So it's kind of neat to find them and watch them. They're not the nicest critters, I can tell you that. We had one staff member try to pick one up and it turned right around on him and tried to chomp his finger. So be careful for that. Then we have the weevils. For the spotted knapweed, we have the root weevil and the seed head weevil. Very similar to the flea beetles, they do spend most of their lives in the root of the plant. That's where the larvae hatch and eat away at the root. They only come up to the surface for a couple of weeks out of the year. Again, usually when it's hot and dry. The seed head weevil will actually eat the seeds out of the spotted knapweed flower, and the root weevil likes to hang out down more so by the base of the plant underneath the leaves. He's a little bit harder to spot. But like the leafy spurge, the weevils, they're never going to eat themselves out of house and home. You're always going to have a little bit of spotted knapweed. That's their home, that's their food source. They're not going to eat all of it. So these control options are good for absentee landowners or organic farmers, or just any area that's not going to get a whole lot of disturbance. Typically, when you're using biological control, you're not going to be spraying as well. So in general, just to repeat, what does the law say? It says that landowners are expected to control, whether it be mechanical, chemical, or biological, any species on the control list. If they are controlling, they are in compliance. So in Ottertail County, this is the enforcement procedure that we have set up. First step is try to establish voluntary compliance through friendly, respectful landowner contact. If after one notice you're not getting any cooperation, you can contact your county ag inspector or the Minnesota Department of Agriculture. In Ottertail County, that would be myself. We have another county weed inspector for the west part of Ottertail County. So each of us have 31 townships that we deal with. And usually my townships give the landowner about a week, 2 weeks tops, because we are still working with that plant timeline. We want to get out there before it goes to seed. So if after one notice they're not getting cooperation, I tell them to contact me right away and I'll take it over from there. We can issue I can issue a Form 1, which is the individual notice to control or eradicate noxious weeds. And it's a form with the state law one, the MDA logo. It does say in there that it's a misdemeanor, and it quotes different parts of the law. And I'll give them a timeline. Usually I like to do 10 to 14 days, just depending on what stage that plant is at. I always like to think that if I got a notice where I suddenly had to control my weeds, how much time would I need to do that, especially if I had plants on a weekend? And so if they still aren't in compliance after that Form 1, I can issue a Form 2, which has the cost of how much it would be for us to send a contractor out there to control their weeds. And usually we make that pretty expensive. We don't want to make it convenient for them. We want to make it hurt a little bit because we don't want to have to become their backup weed management plan. And then if they still are ignoring us, we can issue a Form 3, which gives the contractor permission to go out onto the property and control the weeds. And if we are at that step, we have already talked with our county attorney. We got her backing. We have all of our paperwork in order. I do send my notices with the certified mail. So I have that receipt saying that they got the letter. So if it does go to court, we have that in our folder. So we know that they got that letter. And let's see, this whole process, I've only had to go through it once, and that was with the foreclosure property. It took about 2 seasons because, as you can see, the obvious issue with this is that, you know, sometimes this process isn't started early enough and then the plant goes to seed. In those cases, I just write down the site, the landowner, and I will start the process in June of the following season after the plant has emerged. So we have an entire growing season to get after them. And that seems to work pretty well. Honestly, most infestations are taken care of after my Form 1 gets sent out. But it's always good to have this procedure in your back pocket just in case you ever need it. So grant updates. The past couple years, the Association of County Ag Inspectors has been working with the Minnesota Department of Agriculture to get some sort of grant money that we can use for on the ground treatment of these weeds. So there's several counties out there that have a couple of Minnesota Department of Agriculture grants. I believe that program started up in 2018. Personally, in Otter County, we have done postcards with it. Right now, we have assistance available for controlling wild parsnip and common tansy. And I believe they're going to be doing a 2022 grant application for that. So if that's something you're interested in, if you have a great grant idea, feel free to contact your county ag inspector or a county worker. And I threw these pictures up here because after you start to see these plants over and over and over again, you start to pick them up in the weirdest places. Like all these nice little quotes on here, they're all spotted knapweed, or not spotted knapweed, but a knapweed. So kind of funny as you start going through this stuff, how much of it you start to see in other areas. All right, so that is all I have. I try to keep it basic just for you guys. Like I said, focus on what your townships need to kind of be looking at when you're out there in the field. It's a whole rabbit hole of different advisory committees and associations and categories like you saw, but this kind of boils down to what you guys have to know. So I've got about 7 minutes left. Are there any questions or comments that you guys have for me?
Hey, thank you so much, Aimee. This is Leslie Rosedahl. I'm our meeting host. There's 8 questions in the Q&A box so far. Can you see those?
Oh, yeah, let me look over here.
Yeah, okay. And if you could answer, I know you've got 7 minutes now, so get those real quick. And if folks have additional urgent questions, you go ahead and put it in the Q&A section for Aimee real quick.
Okay. First one is county state ditches are out of control. Canada thistle. County weed inspector has been notified and there's no attempt to take care of the problem. What measures can the township do to take care of this problem? This is with the county. Okay, so there's weeds in the county and the state ditch, and the township is wondering what they can do. You can notify the Minnesota Department of Agriculture. That's Aimee Duchene there. I believe her information is still up. You can contact her to let her know that she needs to contact that county weed inspector. States, I know they just kind of revamped their MnDOT structure, and since then it's gotten a lot better to deal with them. As far as I know, being up in northwestern Minnesota. And so I would just go directly to the source and don't be afraid to pester. All right, another one. 2 questions. First, what's a good way to approach landowners regarding problem weeds? Where'd it go? Problem weeds, especially in areas where some of these weeds keep popping up. Been fairly common, such as areas in Canada thistle. Yes, usually I tell my townships, I know that there's neighbors out there that you're friends with and family that can get a little weird when you're sending out notices. So I recommend putting everybody on the township's name on that letter, so it's not coming just from you. So I guess that's my recommendation. It seems like people have pretty good success with that, but really it's just whatever you're comfortable with. A letter, phone call, site visit. A lot of times when I send out my letters, I'll actually include a map that I print out and I'll circle the the area that I'm talking about for thistles. So they know exactly kind of what I'm seeing. And that seems to have helped a lot as far as making things easier to get that controlled when we're both on the same page about what we're looking at. All right. What's the best way to control or remove poison ivy? I would recommend any herbicide that is advertised to control raspberries or blackberries. Poison ivy has a woody stem, so you're going to be looking at that. And I usually do a foliar application, so spray it right on the leaf. That for me, that's worked pretty well. And you want to do it when the plant is actively growing, so it's going to be taking up that herbicide. Is lupin a noxious weed? No, it is not a noxious weed. It's not on the list. Counties can add noxious weeds to their own county noxious weed list. If they really felt and it was an issue, like I know up in Becker County, they added orange hawkweed to their own little personal county weed list that they enforce as well as a noxious weed law. So that's one way to go about it if lupin was really crazy. Crown vetch, we planted this as an ornamental. Do we need to destroy it? If it's getting aggressive, you might want to start controlling it, but if it seems like it's not really spreading or getting any larger, no, I think it's fine. Cowslip on the list. I guess I'm not familiar with cowslip. Sorry. There's lots of common names for different plants, so I'm gonna go with no, I don't believe so. How to consider eradication could pose a financial hardship for elderly, such as 120 acres or more. Yes. So if it's a very large infestation, they just need to prevent it from getting larger. So in those situations where it's a lot of acres, 120 acres, you can mow the interior perimeter of it. Let's say, I don't know, 20 feet or so. And I would consider that controlling, because you're right, it's going to be really expensive to mow 150 acres. So I would do the interior perimeter of that as a way to get in compliance. Can the township make the DNR control weeds? That is a very common question. It is in the noxious weed law that landowners need to control their noxious weeds, and the DNR is part of the, is considered a landowner. So, I mean, yes, you can go through the process to send them notifications. Usually we get better success. Like I have my townships contact me when there's weeds on a DNR property, and then I'll work with the DNR, and it seems to get taken care of that way, just so the DNR has to deal with one person instead of 31 different people from all of our townships. So are adjacent landowner liable to perform spraying such weed control in the township right away ditch, or can the township make them responsible for it? If it is an infestation of a noxious weed, then yes, you can send them a letter to control their noxious weed infestation. Is there a better time to cut buckthorn so it's not so apt to resprout, such as fall or early spring? Usually when I cut buckthorn, I also treat it with, you can either spray it with Roundup or Garlon. So if you're out there cutting it, just quickly spray the stump with Roundup. I just keep it in like a little spray bottle, like the cleaning spray bottle, and just give a little squirt, and that seems to take care of it pretty well. But usually you want to cut it either when it's actively growing or in the fall when it's taking its reserves for winter. Is burdock, I think it's burdock, a noxious weed? It's sure it's a pain to get rid of. I agree. Burdock is not on the noxious weed list, but we do have it on our property, and it is a huge pain to get rid of. What about state noxious national park then that is next to your border? Again, with kind of similar to the DNR, you want to get in touch with whoever is on that state or on the pretty much whoever owns the state land. I don't know if it's DNR or NDA or what, but you're gonna want to talk with them, because usually if you want to control weeds that are on the border, they're usually willing to work with you on that. This mechanical removal on thistle was the best frost stage to eliminate this weed. For thistle, when you're mowing it, you want to wait until that plant is almost doggone ready to go to seed before you mow it. That way you might get away with just one application. How do you get rid of horulism? Great question. That's not one that is on the noxious weed list, so I'm not entirely sure. I guess you would have to talk with the co-op to get a good herbicide recommendation. Sorry, I don't have a specific answer. How do you remove tansy? We had great success with killing common tansy with Escort herbicide. It literally took 2 applications and it was gone. Highly recommend Escort for tansy. With mechanical removal, when it's okay. Virginia stickweed, bigger slice. Any suggestions for controlling? I don't have any experience controlling that plant. I know what it is. I know it's a pain, but I guess I don't have any specific herbicide recommendations just because I don't know. I'm sorry. Okay, I think I got them all. Did I? Mechanical removal was the best growth stage to remove thistle. Again, when it's just about to go to seed, that's when you want to get it.
Great, thank you, Amy. I think you did get them all, and
Great.
appreciate all the folks. I know they're saying thank you in the comments and the chat. I know you need to run at 10:50. Appreciate your time. Why don't we take a 10-minute break and then we'll start with our next speaker right at 11 o'clock.
All
So
right,
folks
great.
can.
Thanks,
Yeah, thanks
guys. Have a
again,
good day.
Amy. Okay.
Thank you, Leslie, for all you're doing.
Oh, thanks, Rex.